If you think you know what betrayal looks like, let me stop you right there. I thought it meant tears, apologies, and begging for forgiveness. I was wrong. My wife of 22 years didn't just cheat on me. She sat on my kitchen counter, drank my top-shelf whiskey with her lover, and looked me dead in the eye, annoyed that I had the nerve to interrupt them. Welcome to my nightmare. I'm 54 years old. I've spent the last 3 decades building a commercial logistics company from a single leased truck into a business that allowed my wife, Claire, to live a life most women only see on television. We had the sprawling house in the Connecticut suburbs, the luxury cars swapped out every 2 years, and an empty nest that was supposed to be our golden era. Claire is 50. She is one of those women who fights aging with an iron fist and my credit card. Pilates, strict diets, expensive dermatologists. She maintained her beauty, but over the years, that beauty turned sharp. Cold. She became entitled, always treating my long hours at the office as a personal insult, while happily spending the money those hours generated. But I loved her, or at least, I loved the woman I married, and I thought we had an understanding. It was a Tuesday in late October, a miserable, rainy Tuesday. I had a severe migraine, so I left the office at 3 p.m. instead of my usual 6:30. I didn't call ahead. Why would I? It's my house. I pulled into the driveway and noticed a black Ford Raptor parked near the garage. It was muddy, aggressive-looking, and completely out of place in our manicured neighborhood. I assumed it was a contractor. Claire was always having something remodeled to keep herself busy. I unlocked the front door and walked in. The house was warm. I could hear music playing from the kitchen, not the soft jazz Claire usually played, but loud, heavy blues rock. I dropped my briefcase in the foyer and walked down the hallway. "Claire," I called out, rubbing my temples. No answer. Just the music. I turned the corner into the kitchen, and my feet stopped moving. My brain simply refused to process the scene in front of me for a solid 5 seconds. Claire was sitting on the edge of the marble kitchen island. Her silk blouse was completely unbuttoned. Standing between her legs was a man I had never seen before. He was in his mid-40s, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing worn-in jeans and a grey t-shirt. He had one hand resting casually on my wife's bare thigh, and in his other hand he was holding a crystal tumbler filled with my Macallan 25-year-old scotch. I expected the panic. I expected them to scramble, to push away from each other, for Claire to scream or cover up. Neither of them moved. The man slowly turned his head to look at me. He didn't drop his hand from her leg. He just took a slow sip of my whiskey, his eyes locked onto mine, completely devoid of fear. I looked at Claire, my heart pounding so hard in my chest I thought my ribs would crack. Claire didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She let out a long, dramatic sigh, rolled her eyes, and slowly began buttoning her blouse. "Jesus, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with irritation. "What are you doing home at 3 in the afternoon? You know I hate it when you break your routine." I stared at her, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity. What the hell is this?" My voice cracked. I hated that it cracked. The man finally spoke. He had a deep, gravelly voice. "I'm Vance," he said, not offering a hand, not stepping away from my wife. "I guess you're Mark." "Get your hands off my wife and get out of my house," I managed to say, taking a step forward, my fists clenching. Vance chuckled, a genuine amused chuckle. He set the glass down on the marble counter with a heavy clink. "Your house? Sure, man. But let's be honest, you're just the guy paying the bills. I'm the guy actually keeping her entertained." I saw red. I took another step, ready to do something that would probably put me in a police car. But before I could close the distance, Claire slid off the counter and stepped between us. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting her own peace and quiet. "Mark, stop it," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Don't act like a Neanderthal. You've neglected me for 5 years. You're married to your freight company. Did you really think I was just going to sit here and dry up while you looked at spreadsheets?" "You're in my house," I yelled, the shock finally giving way to blinding rage. "In our kitchen." "Oh, grow up," Claire sneered, looking at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Vance is leaving anyway. He has a life, unlike you. Go up to your study, Mark. Take an aspirin. We'll talk about this like adults when you calm down." She turned back to Vance, completely ignoring me, and softly touched his chest. "I'll call you later," she murmured, a sickeningly sweet smile on her face. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a decade. Vance smirked, picked up his jacket from my dining chair, and looked at me as he walked toward the door. "Thanks for the scotch, Mark," he said, passing right by me. "Smooth, just like your wife." I stood there in the center of the kitchen, listening to the heavy front door click shut, followed by the roar of the Ford Raptor's engine starting in my driveway. Claire picked up Vance's half-empty glass, walked over to the sink, and poured the $300-a-bottle whiskey down the drain. She turned to me, her face utterly devoid of guilt or shame. "If you're going to divorce me over this," she said coldly, leaning against the counter, "just know I'm taking half the company, the house, and your pension. So, I suggest you go upstairs, take a shower, and ask yourself if your pride is worth going bankrupt at 54. She walked past me and headed up the stairs, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen. She thought she had me trapped. She thought I was a tired, old ATM who would just swallow the disrespect to protect my assets. But as I stood there listening to her footsteps on the hardwood floors, the rage inside me turned ice cold. I didn't want to hit her. I didn't want to scream. I wanted to destroy her. And I was going to make sure she didn't get a single dime. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't take a shower. I went straight into my home office, locked the heavy oak door, and sat in the dark. I expected to hear Claire crying. I expected her to come banging on the door, spewing excuses, begging me not to call a lawyer. But the house was dead silent. 2 hours later, the smell of roasted garlic drifted under my door. She was cooking. My wife, who had just been caught half-naked on our kitchen island with another man, was casually making her famous lemon herb salmon as if it were a normal Tuesday evening. At 7 p.m., she knocked on my door. Just 2 light, polite taps. "Mark," she called out, her voice perfectly steady. "Dinner is ready. I'm leaving a plate for you in the microwave. I have a Zoom call with my book club at 8, so keep the TV volume down if you come out." I closed my eyes. The absolute, unshakable arrogance of this woman. She wasn't just completely unbothered by what had happened. She was actively managing me. She honestly believed that her threat of taking half my company had put me back in my box. She thought I was broken. She was wrong. I run a commercial logistics empire. My entire life is built on tracking assets, finding inefficiencies, and ruthlessly cutting dead weight. Claire was no longer my wife. She was dead weight. The next morning, I left the house at 5 a.m. before she even woke up. I didn't go to my logistics office. I drove straight to downtown Hartford to meet with David, a brutal, high-end divorce attorney recommended by my corporate counsel. I sat in his glass-walled office and laid it all out. No emotions, just facts. David leaned back in his leather chair and gave it to me straight. "Mark, Connecticut is an equitable distribution state. Cheating doesn't mean she leaves with nothing. If you file today, she will likely get a massive chunk of your business, the house, and lifetime alimony. The law doesn't care about your broken heart." "I don't have a broken heart," I replied, my voice deadpan. "I have a pest problem. I want to know how I keep my money." David smiled thinly. There is one angle. Dissipation of marital assets. If we can prove she has been spending your money to fund her affair, the judge can heavily penalize her in the asset split. We need a paper trail. Every dime she spent on this guy. But if you confront her now, she'll hide it. You need to go back to that house and play the role of the beaten, submissive husband. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. When I got home that evening, Claire was on the living room sofa, sipping a glass of wine and scrolling through her iPad. She barely looked up. "Did you call a lawyer?" she asked, not even pausing her scrolling. "No," I lied, forcing the words out of my throat. "I don't want to lose the business, Claire. I don't want a divorce." She finally looked at me. A smug, victorious smile spread across her face. She took a sip of her wine. "Good boy. See? That wasn't so hard. We can coexist, Mark. You pay the bills, you run your little trucks, and you let me live my life. As long as you don't embarrass me, I won't ruin you." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and nodded. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost in my own home, and I turned my logistics skills toward my marriage. No hidden cameras, no private investigators sitting in cars. I just started digging into the one thing Claire never paid attention to: the finances. She had 3 credit cards linked to my primary accounts. For years, I just paid the balances blindly. Not anymore. I pulled 2 years' worth of statements and sat in my office late at night, matching dates and locations. The picture that emerged was sickening. Vance wasn't just a rugged guy she met at a bar. He was a parasite, a very expensive parasite. There were hotel rooms in Boston, first-class flights to Miami, charges for high-end men's clothing boutiques, places Vance clearly shopped at to dress up for her. But then I found the crown jewel. I noticed a recurring monthly wire transfer of $1,200 from our joint savings account to a local credit union. I called a favor from a banker friend. It took him 10 minutes to verify the destination. It was an auto loan payment. That muddy, aggressive-looking black Ford Raptor parked in my driveway on the day I caught them. Vance didn't own it. I owned it. My wife had used my money to put a $25,000 down payment on her lover's truck, and I was paying the monthly note. I sat in my office chair, staring at the bank statement, and started laughing. It was a cold, humorless laugh. The next morning, a Saturday, I was drinking coffee in the kitchen. Claire walked in, dressed in expensive workout gear. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text message lit up the screen. "Vance, need new tires for the truck today? Throw $2,000 in my Venmo, babe." She picked up the phone, tapped the screen a few times to send my money to the man who drank my scotch, and grabbed her keys. "I'm going to Pilates," she said without looking at me. "I need you to call the pool guy today. The heater is acting up." "Sure thing, Claire," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Have a great workout." She walked out the door. She thought she was invincible. She thought I was a spineless coward who would fund her affair just to keep up appearances. She had no idea that I had just finished executing a legal maneuver that would wipe her out completely. And the trap was set to spring on her 50th birthday party in front of all her high society friends. Claire's 50th birthday was a milestone she had been planning for 6 months. She wanted the main ballroom at the Oak Ridge Country Club. She demanded a live jazz band, imported French champagne, and a guest list of 150 of Connecticut's most pretentious elite. The price tag? $42,000. When she handed me the venue's invoice 2 weeks before the party, she had a challenging, almost mocking look in her eye. She was testing me. "Pay it," she demanded, dropping the paper on my desk. "Of course," I said, pulling out my checkbook without breaking eye contact. "You only turned 50 once." She smiled, snatching the check from my hand. She thought she had completely broken my spirit. She thought she had me trained like a dog. What she didn't know was that I had spent the last 3 weeks restructuring my entire logistics company. With the help of my legal team, I had legally transferred the bulk of my corporate assets into a blind trust that she had absolutely no claim to, citing a long-planned corporate buyout. The $42,000 check to the country club would clear, but it would be the last major purchase she ever made on my dime. 2 days before the big party, I was in the driveway loading my golf clubs into the trunk of my sedan. I heard a heavy engine rumble down the street. The black Ford Raptor pulled into my driveway. It was Vance. He put the truck in park and rolled down the window. He was wearing a pair of expensive Ray-Ban sunglasses. Sunglasses I recognized from my American Express statement. "Hey, Mark," he called out, a smug, relaxed grin plastered on his face. "Claire inside?" I shut my trunk and slowly walked over to the driver's side of the truck. I looked down at the massive, brand-new off-road tires. The tires I had just paid $2,000 for. "She's upstairs getting ready," I said, my voice dead calm. Vance chuckled, leaning his thick arm out the window. "Man, you are something else. Most guys would have tried to key my truck by now, or at least take a swing at me. But you're a good provider, Mark. Claire says you're paying for the big bash on Saturday. I wish I could be there." "Oh, you'll be there in spirit, Vance," I said. "Nice tires, by the way. They grip well?" "Like a dream, buddy. Thanks for asking." He actually winked at me. He winked at the man whose wife he was sleeping with, sitting in the truck that man bought him. "Tell Claire I'm waiting." I watched him walk right through my front door. My blood didn't boil this time. It ran ice cold. I knew exactly what was coming. Saturday night arrived. The country club ballroom was dripping in crystal, white orchids, and pure arrogance. Claire was completely in her element. She wore a stunning, custom-made emerald green gown. She worked the room like a politician, laughing, sipping champagne, and accepting expensive gifts from other wealthy housewives. For 3 hours, she played the role of the devoted, happy wife. She even dragged me over to a group of my business partners for a photo, tightly gripping my arm and flashing a brilliant smile for the country club photographer. "Smile, Mark," she hissed under her breath, her teeth clenched. "Try not to look like a miserable old man. People are staring." "I'm having the time of my life, Claire," I whispered back. By 10 p.m., the liquor was flowing heavily. The jazz band finished a set, and it was time for the traditions. The room quieted down as the country club manager wheeled out a massive 4-tier birthday cake. The crowd of 150 guests gathered around the center of the ballroom. Claire stood next to the cake, glowing under the chandelier lights. She looked across the room at me, raising her eyebrow. She expected me to play my part. She expected the typical boring husband speech about how beautiful she was, how she never aged, and how lucky I was to have her. I picked up a silver spoon and tapped it against my crystal champagne flute. Clink, clink, clink. The ballroom fell completely silent. The soft hum of classical background music faded out. 150 pairs of eyes turned to me. I walked up to the microphone stand positioned next to the cake. In my left hand, I held my glass of champagne. In my right hand, I held a thick, heavy manila envelope. "Good evening, everyone," I said into the microphone. My voice boomed through the speakers, steady, deep, and echoing off the high ceilings. "I'd like to make a toast to my wife Claire on her 50th birthday." Claire beamed, looking around at her friends, completely oblivious. "Claire and I have been married for 22 years, I continued, looking directly into her eyes. "And over those 2 decades, I've learned that a successful marriage requires 3 things: honesty, respect, and a really good forensic accountant." A few people in the crowd chuckled nervously. thinking it was a dry joke. Claire's smile faltered, just a fraction. Her eyes darted to the manila envelope in my hand. I didn't smile back. The time for playing the submissive husband was over. The silence in the ballroom became heavy. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Claire let out a high-pitched, forced laugh, looking at the crowd. "Oh, Mark and his dry corporate humor," she projected, her voice tight. She shot me a glare that could peel paint off a wall. "Give it a rest, honey. Let's cut the cake." "I'm not joking, Claire," I said, leaning closer into the microphone. I didn't raise my voice. I kept it low, steady, and loud enough for every single one of her high society friends to hear. "You see, for the last month, Claire has been under the impression that she had me completely trapped. A month ago, I came home early and found my wife on our kitchen island with a man named Vance. He was drinking my scotch. He was wearing clothes she bought him with my money." A collective, sharp gasp rippled through the crowd. A woman in the front row actually covered her mouth. Several of my business partners stiffened. Claire's face drained of all color. The smugness vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. "Mark, stop!" she hissed, stepping toward me. "You're embarrassing yourself. You're drunk." "I haven't had a drop," I replied into the mic. I held up the thick manila envelope. Claire thought that because she threatened to take half my company and my pension, I would just sit quietly and fund her double life. And why wouldn't she? After all, it's expensive to maintain a younger man. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of neatly bound papers. "I've spent the last 3 weeks doing what I do best, auditing. I pulled every credit card statement, every bank wire, and every hidden transaction from the last 2 years. And the results were impressive, Claire." I looked out at her friends. They were absolutely paralyzed, hanging on to every word. First-class tickets to Miami, $3,000 weekend retreats in Boston, and my personal favorite. I turned to look directly at Claire, who was now trembling with rage. The $25,000 down payment and the monthly auto loan for Vance's black Ford Raptor. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am currently financing my wife's lover's off-road vehicle. "You son of a bitch!" Claire snarled, dropping the sweet housewife act completely. Her voice echoed in the silent room. She didn't deny it. She was just furious she was caught. "If you think you can humiliate me and get away with it, you are dead wrong. I am going to ruin you. I am taking the house, I am taking the business, and I am leaving you with absolutely nothing." I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "That brings me to this envelope," I said, stepping away from the microphone stand and walking right up to her. I handed her the heavy manila folder. She snatched it out of my hands like a feral cat. "What you're holding, Claire, are the official divorce filings," I said, my voice carrying naturally through the dead, quiet room. "But more importantly, you're holding a legal declaration of dissipation of marital assets." She stared at the papers, her eyes darting over the legal jargon, her breathing shallow. "In Connecticut," I explained calmly to the crowd, "if a spouse uses marital funds to finance an affair, the judge subtracts that amount, plus heavy penalties, from their side of the settlement. Every hotel, every dinner, every set of tires you bought for Vance, you are paying me back for every single dime." "I still get half the business," she screamed, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face, the emerald gown suddenly looking ridiculous on her. "No, you don't," I said abruptly, stepping closer so only she and the front row could hear. "Because I don't own it anymore. While you were busy planning this $42,000 party and sending Vance money on Venmo, I legally restructured. The corporate assets were transferred into a blind trust 2 weeks ago as part of a pre-planned buyout. It's untouchable. You get half of our shared savings, minus the penalties for the truck and the trips. which leaves you with practically nothing. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. The realization hit her like a freight train. The ATM was closed. The ride was over. "Happy 50th birthday, Claire," I said. I set my champagne glass down on the cake table. I didn't look back at the crowd. I didn't wait for her to start screaming again. I simply turned around and walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, the sea of wealthy elites parting for me in stunned silence. As I pushed through the heavy double doors of the country club and stepped out into the cool night air, I pulled out my cell phone. I had one more piece of business to take care of. It was time to deal with Vance. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the distant sound of the jazz band still playing inside the country club. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Mike," I said when my head dispatcher answered. It was 11 p.m. on a Saturday, but in the freight business, we work 24/7. "I need a heavy-duty flatbed tow truck dispatched immediately. Texting you the address now. I'll meet the driver there." "You got it, boss," Mike replied. No questions asked. I drove 20 minutes across town to a mid-tier apartment complex. It was exactly the kind of place a guy like Vance would live in. Decent enough from the outside, but ultimately cheap. I pulled into the visitor parking lot. Sure enough, sitting right under a streetlight, looking aggressive and pristine with its brand new $2,000 tires, was the black Ford Raptor. 10 minutes later, the air brakes of a massive Peterbilt flatbed hissed as it backed into the lot. My driver, a burly guy named Tony, hopped out. "Which one, Mr. Miller?" Tony asked, pulling on his heavy work gloves. "The black Raptor," I said, handing Tony a copy of the vehicle's title and registration. "It's legally registered in my name. Hook it up." Tony didn't waste time. The steel cables were attached, and the winch began groaning, pulling the heavy truck up the steel ramp. The sound was deafening in the quiet apartment complex. That was the point. A third-floor apartment door flew open, and Vance stepped out onto the metal breezeway. He was wearing sweatpants and a tank top. Hey, what the hell are you doing?" he yelled, scrambling down the concrete stairs. He jogged into the parking lot, his chest puffed out, ready for a fight. Then he saw me standing next to the tow truck, my hands casually resting in the pockets of my tailored suit. Vance stopped in his tracks, his arrogant sneer faltering for just a second before he tried to recover. "Mark, are you out of your mind, old man? Tell your guy to drop my truck right now, or I'm putting you on the pavement." I didn't flinch. I just looked at him with sheer pity. "It's not your truck, Vance," I said, calmly over the sound of the idling diesel engine. "It's my truck. My name is on the title, and the loan is tied to an account that has just been frozen. You haven't made a single payment on it. My wife did, and as of 10 minutes ago, my wife is completely broke." Vance blinked, his thick brow furrowing as his brain struggled to process the information. The fake tough guy persona began to melt into genuine confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I just handed Claire divorce papers in front of 150 of her closest friends," I explained, leaning against my car. "I proved she was using marital funds to finance your lifestyle. The hotel rooms, the clothes, and this truck. By state law, the money she spent on you is being deducted from her settlement. She's getting nothing, Vance. The ATM is out of cash." Vance looked up at the Raptor, now fully secured on the bed of the tow truck. He looked back at me. The realization hit him, and you could practically see the dollar signs fading from his eyes. "She told me she was getting half your company," he muttered, almost to himself. "She lied," I said. "Or rather, she underestimated the man who pays her bills." "So, here's the reality, Vance. You can try to take a swing at me, which will land you in jail. Or you can walk back upstairs, realize you backed the wrong horse, and figure out how you're going to get to work on Monday without my vehicle." Tony, the tow driver, stepped up next to me, holding a massive steel pry bar. He didn't say a word, just stared Vance down. Vance looked at Tony, looked at the truck, and then let out a sharp, bitter laugh. He ran a hand through his hair and took a step back. "Man," Vance said, shaking his head. The arrogance was completely gone. He wasn't a wolf. He was just a scavenger who realized the carcass was picked clean. "You know what? Keep the truck. She's a high-maintenance nightmare anyway. She's your problem now." "No," I replied smoothly, opening my car door. "She's a free agent. Good luck, Vance." I nodded to Tony, and the flatbed pulled out of the lot, taking the truck with it. I got into my car and drove home. For the first time in 5 years, the house felt completely mine. It's been 6 months since that night. The divorce went exactly as my lawyer, David, predicted. The judge took one look at the forensic accounting and the blatant asset dissipation and hammered Claire. The blind trust protected my company completely. By the time the penalties were applied for all the money she wasted on Vance, Claire was left with a fraction of our savings. She had to sell her designer bags and her jewelry just to afford the down payment on a small 2-bedroom condo in a town she used to make fun of. Vance, true to his nature, blocked her number the very next morning. When he realized she couldn't fund his lifestyle anymore, he vanished, looking for his next victim. Claire threw away a 22-year marriage, a life of absolute luxury, and her reputation, all for a man who dumped her the second she lost her credit cards. Last I heard, she took a job as a receptionist at a real estate office to make ends meet. She hates it. As for me, I just turned 55. I'm sitting on my back porch right now. The sun is setting, the air is quiet, and I'm holding a crystal tumbler filled with a fresh bottle of Macallan 25-year-old scotch. I take a sip. It tastes incredible. They think because we get older, we get softer. They think because we work hard and provide, we'll just turn a blind eye to disrespect out of fear of being alone. Let them think that. Let them think you're asleep at the wheel. Because when they finally make their move, they'll never see you coming. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and protect what's yours.